Hey guys, thanks for watching Beyond Science. It's Mike Chen. Many of you have sent in this topic for me to talk about, so let's talk about it. Writers have always seemed to possess an uncanny ability to foretell future events through their fictional works. Books in the fantasy and science fiction genres written decades ago, for example, have predicted with some degree of accuracy some of the advanced technologies as well as societal norms that we have today, which were probably inconceivable for people back then. Now, most of these predictions of the future turn out to be somehow impressively close to what we have and what is happening in our society today. Not because these authors used their secret powers of clairvoyance, at least I don't think so, but because of their creativity, open-mindedness, and forward thinking. However, there have been cases where the prophetic contents of some books from many years before are just too disturbingly on point about the details of our present world that we simply can't immediately dismiss them. One such case has recently generated a lot of buzz online, and it involves the novels written by 19th century author Ingersoll Lockwood, who some people in social media believe is a clairvoyant author who prophesied current US President Donald Trump's rise to power more than a century ago. And given the online world's current fascination with this highly speculative theory, let's find out who Lockwood was and the reasons why people think his books could predict the future. Now, a little background. Ingersoll Lockwood was an American lawyer from New York, but he was also a political writer and a published novelist. He was known for infusing science fiction and fantasy elements into his children's stories that he had written in the late 1800s. And among several stories that he had written, 3 had recently risen after a century of obscurity. The first 2 are children's fantasy novels. One is titled The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger, while the other was published with the title Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. The third one, on the other hand, is a short political fiction entitled The Last President, which Lockwood had published back in 1896. So I think just mentioning the book's titles, you guys are sort of seeing the connection here, and it just gets crazier from here. Lockwood's 2 fictional fantasy novels centered on a young character named Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump, a wealthy baron living in a place called Castle Trump. In the books, this peculiar character is more commonly referred to as Little Baron Trump. Unsurprisingly, in hearing that name today, Baron Trump, the youngest son of President Trump, springs to mind. Now, in the book, Little Baron Trump is described as a child with a very active brain and wild imagination. However, he is stifled by and bored of his incredibly lavish lifestyle inside his castle. He then embarks on a magical journey in search of a pathway to alternate dimensions, and the experience would change his life forever. In the stories, Baron Trump's adventure begins in Russia, and he is guided by a master of all masters Spaniard named Don Constantino Bartholomew Stronfolo Figuanerius. For most of the story, however, thank goodness, he is simply referred to as Don Fume. In Spanish, the word Don is an honorific title, but some have mistaken it for the character's actual name, and considering the word Don appears for about 60 times in the story, some people could not help but associate this Don Fume character to the current president, whose first name is of course Donald. The similarity in the names of the characters in Lockwood's children's books with the names of President Trump and his son can easily be dismissed as pure coincidence by most people. However, the eerie connection between Lockwood's written works and the Trump family does not end there. The plot of his political story, The Last President, somehow disturbingly parallels recent events that have happened in our world today. The story of The Last President begins in early November in New York City, which, following the massive outrage over the election of a vehemently opposed presidential candidate, is in utter chaos. In the book, the protesting mob led by anarchists and socialists threaten to plunder and despoil the houses of the rich. And if you haven't figured out the connection already, this event in Lockwood's book is eerily similar to what happened following Donald Trump's inauguration in January of 2017, where the Women's March was held the next day and the east side of New York City was flooded by protesters. Lockwood also wrote in his novel about the Fifth Avenue Hotel being the first to feel the fury of the mob and wondered if the troops would arrive in time to prevent further hostilities. This is even stranger when you realize that the Women's March concluded just a couple of blocks away from Trump Tower International, a building that is coincidentally located on Fifth Avenue. To some conspiracy theorists, the eerie similarity between the events that took place in Lockwood's book and the recent actual events in the United States is something to be concerned about, given that The Last President ended with the collapse of the Republic. And if it turns out that Lockwood's words were truly prophetic, then we can't help but wonder, will the US government meet its demise during Trump's administration? Will he really be the last president of America? Now, here's where some people took this even further. Speculation over Lockwood's purported clairvoyance is not the only conspiracy theory connected to his novels. Some have even used his books to support another claim that Donald Trump and his family have the technology to travel through time. Online conspiracy theories suggest that the Trump family got a hold of a functional time machine somehow through President Trump's uncle John, who allegedly acquired it from Nikola Tesla, who was of course an accomplished scientist and was known to be very fascinated with time travel. And with this secret technology, the Trump family has supposedly been traveling through time for many years in order to maintain and increase their power and influence. So in conclusion, we can't really ignore the fact that there are a lot of strange coincidences involved in this conspiracy theory, but I really don't think that Trump has a time machine. But I love topics like this. I love topics about coincidences because personally, I don't really believe in coincidences. I feel like things happen for a reason, and I do think they make life just a bit stranger, but a whole lot more interesting. So I don't know, maybe Lockwood is able to, I don't know, somehow see into the future a little bit, maybe had a dream, has some kind of inspiration, because just for me, there's a little too much similarities between what he wrote and what's happening right now to just be accidental. I don't know, it could be, but like I said, I don't really believe in coincidences. But I also don't think Trump has a time machine. But anyway, really interesting topic. Thank you all so much for sending it in. Let me know what you think. Do you think Trump has a time machine? Do you think Lockwood somehow is able to see into the future, or this is all just completely accidental? Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you later.